1586. A handful of Portuguese missionaries are hacking their way through the Cambodian jungle, miserable, sweating through their robes, half convinced the cicadas are personally mocking them. For days, their guides have been promising something up ahead, something big. The missionaries, frankly, assumed they were exaggerating. They were not exaggerating. The trees part, and there it is, a city that looks less like it was built and more like it grew out of the ground on purpose. Gateways cut so precisely they barely look like separate stones at all. And rising up in the middle of it, a temple so absurd in its ambition that one of the missionaries will later sit down to write about it and simply give up. He says it himself, "You cannot describe this with a pen." Fair enough. He tried. Here's the strange part, though. The city isn't dead. It only looks dead. Monks in saffron robes are still quietly moving between the stones, still lighting incense in front of shrines nobody officially remembers building. Meanwhile, the jungle has been busy. Roots as thick as ship masts have wound straight through the stonework, like the forest is very slowly, very patiently taking its city back. So naturally, the missionaries ask the obvious question. Who built this? And how exactly do you build something on this scale and then just leave? Their guides don't know. Nobody really does. All they can offer is the version handed down from their grandparents, that it took more than 20 kings working over centuries to raise this place out of the earth. One last question then. What's it called? Angkor. Except that's not even really a name. In Old Khmer, it just means the city. Not a name, a description. And somehow, that's the word that survived everything else. That's the word we still use today. The name got lost, the nickname stuck. This is the story of the empire that built it. For about 600 years, from the early 800s to the mid-1400s, the Khmer ran one of the most formidable civilizations on Earth, stretching across what's now Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. And right at the center of all that power sat a single city so large it's almost difficult to take seriously. Angkor covered more than 1,000 square kilometers. That's bigger than New York City today, with all our cranes and glass towers. Somewhere between the 11th and 13th centuries, it supported at least 1 million people. Let that sit for a second. 1 in every 1,000 people alive on the planet at that time was living in this one city. Not a remote curiosity buried in the jungle. This was, for a while, basically the center of the world. So, what happened? How do you go from 1 million people to total silence? From the beating heart of a civilization to a place the jungle had to be cleared away from just to see? That's what we're here to figure out. When word of Angkor eventually drifted back to Europe, the response was less fascinating and more absolutely not. European visitors looked at this and decided it was simply too sophisticated to have been built by the people who, actually lived there. One writer, working out of Madrid in 1647, announced with total confidence that the ruins must have been built by the Roman Emperor Trajan. He did not explain how Trajan's architects supposedly ended up in the Cambodian jungle. He just left that part out. Bold strategy. Other theories floating around at the time included Alexander the Great, a lost race of giants, basically anyone except the people standing right there, farming the fields next door. The one explanation almost nobody in Europe wanted to believe was the actual one, that the Khmer built it themselves. So, let's give them their credit. The Khmer are one of the oldest peoples in Southeast Asia, with roots going back over 4,000 years. likely migrating down from southern China long before anyone was writing any of this down. And they weren't just early, they were good. Among the first societies on Earth to work bronze, credited as one of the first cultures anywhere to come up with the concept of zero, which, if you've ever tried to do math without it, is no small thing. They also developed the oldest writing system still in use anywhere in Southeast Asia. This was not a backwater. This was a civilization that kept inventing things other civilizations would later get credit for. But being talented doesn't automatically mean being free. An earlier kingdom, Chenla, had once held Cambodia together. By the 8th century, it had fallen apart into a mess of small, squabbling territories, each one ruled by its own local strongman, none of them powerful enough on their own to matter much. And looming over all of them was someone who very much did matter: the Cham. Operating out of their capital at Vijaya, on the coast of what's now southern Vietnam, the Cham had built themselves a genuinely impressive trading empire, backed up by a navy that didn't ask permission. Ships with dragon-headed prows could turn up on practically any river or coastline in the region with very little warning. Loyalty wasn't requested, it was simply expected. And a divided Khmer population didn't have much choice but to go along with it. That, eventually, was about to change. Historians date the beginning of the Khmer Empire to the year 802, and to one specific man. We know almost nothing about where he came from, no record of his family, no clues about his childhood, nothing. He shows up in history already mid-stride, well-born, relentless, and apparently uninterested in explaining himself to anyone. But the name he chose tells you everything you actually need to know. Jayavarman. That was the name of the last king of Chenla, the empire that had once united Cambodia and then collapsed. By calling himself Jayavarman II, this man wasn't just picking a nice royal-sounding name. He was making an announcement to everyone at once. The old kings are back, and we're finishing what we started. And he didn't waste time proving it. He took the city of Yadapura in the southeast first, then followed the Mekong north and took Sambupura too. City after city, he cut a path from the southeast all the way to the northwest, and at every single stop, more people joined him. One surviving inscription describes his rise in almost mythical terms, comparing him to a flower blooming straight out of royal bloodline. Subtle, these inscriptions were. But the faster he rose, the more enemies he collected. In the west, a number of Khmer lords were still loyal to the Cham crown, and they fought back hard. Jayavarman's army was beaten badly and pushed in retreat into the Kulen Hills, a brutal stretch of jungle-covered mountains whose name almost comically translates to Lychee Hills. Beaten, cornered, out of momentum. At this point, you'd be forgiven for assuming the story ends here. A failed rebel hiding in some hills, picked off eventually by history's footnotes. But somewhere up in those hills, surrounded by what was left of his army, Jayavarman figured something out, something that would end up reshaping an entire civilization. You can conquer Cambodia with an army, you cannot unite it with one. What the Khmer needed wasn't a better general, they needed a god. So, up in the Kulen Hills, Jayavarman sent for a Brahmin priest, a specialist in Hindu sacred ritual, brought in from outside Cambodia entirely, and together, the two of them staged something nobody in the region had quite seen executed like this before. It was called the Deva Raja, the God King ritual. We don't actually know the exact details. No surviving account spells it out. but based on similar ceremonies elsewhere in the Hindu world, we can guess at the shape of it. Sacred grass burning, incense thick in the air, Sanskrit chants rising into the dark. Maybe an animal sacrifice somewhere in the middle of it all. What we do know is what walked out the other side. By the time it was over, Jayavarman wasn't just a warlord with an army anymore. He'd repositioned himself as something else entirely, a living bridge between the human world and the divine. A king whose authority didn't come from winning battles, but from the gods themselves. And that idea spread fast. When the remaining Khmer territories heard a god king had been crowned, the resistance more or less evaporated on its own. Through more campaigns, some smart marriages, a handful of alliances, and a lot of land grants, Jayavarman brought one kingdom after another under his control. For the first time in generations, Cambodia was a single country again. The territory stretched north toward China, east to the old rival Champa, south to the ocean, and west into a region one inscription rather poetically calls the land of cardamoms and mangoes, almost certainly somewhere near modern Myanmar. And once unification was done, the building started. Jayavarman built his capital at a place he named Hari Haralaida, Palace on the high ground, a massive reservoir dug nearby, swamps drained, embankments raised, an entire river rerouted to make it all work. None of that was just for show either. In Hindu belief, the gods live on Mount Meru, surrounded by a sea of milk. Jayavarman's palace, overlooking his man-made reservoir, was a deliberate copy of that exact image. Heaven, rebuilt in stone and water on Cambodian soil. And this was just the opening move. Jayavarman had shown what was possible. The kings who came after him would take that same ambition and run it to extremes he probably couldn't have pictured. Temples big enough to swallow cathedrals whole, engineering capable of taming entire monsoon seasons, a capital that would, for a while, become the most populated city on the planet. But no empire, no matter how grand, gets to skip the part where it eventually breaks. And the next king to inherit Jayavarman's throne wouldn't just inherit a kingdom, he'd inherit a family grudge, a war with his own brother, and, if one old legend is to be believed, a disease slowly eating away at his body, giving him every reason in the world to build something that would outlast him. That's where we're headed next. A war between brothers, a king who might be dying, and a question neither of them would ever fully answer.